Creating objects and environments that play with scale, texture, shapes, color, light, and shadow, which the ties are just so eminently suited for that. And the layers are whimsical and subversive. The shapes, cones, cylinders, some of them are donuts. I encourage you to look them up online. They're just absolutely just stupendous. They can seem silly, sexual, or even menacing, depending on how you look at them. And just finally, in their words, we're interested in forms that take on a life of their own, that demand your attention, but don't have a straightforward story to tell. So I will leave it with you, Isaac.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I want to thank Renee and Courtney for inviting me to be in the show. It's a great privilege to be with all these wonderful artists and have an opportunity to show this piece and from this body of work. As Courtney mentioned, this came from a collaboration of about 10 years, and I took the reins from that when my collaborator left and started a family and went up to Seattle. This has been such a beast of a body of work to work on. As you can see, there's a lot of material here. I'll answer some of the questions I get a lot because I think that's a great place to start. Because you may be asking those questions yourself right now. How many neckties is it? It's between 3,500 and 4,000 neckties. And if it seems kind of surprising to have a rounding error of 500, that can give you a sense of how much material I'm working with. This, for example, does not make a dent in the palette of material that I have to work with. Sadly. I think whenever I make a large form, I'm always hoping that it's going to just absorb a lot of material, and finally the burden of having so much fabric to store and work with will be off my hands, and never, ever, ever does it make a dent. All of these ties are part of what I'm guessing is about 20,000 neckties individually, and if you kind of wonder what that looks like in terms of just sheer mass, it's a moving truck. It's a moving truck worth of fabric. So when we started this, the other question I get is, have you thought of making a dress with them? Yes. I'll leave it at that. But actually, I think that is an interesting question, even though I'm being a little glib with that. This is a piece of clothing, right? Lots of pieces of clothing, and I think it's a really interesting piece of clothing. Of all of them, I think it has no real physical, practical function. I think just if you look at the necktie itself, I like to describe them. The way I use them is really like a pixel, right? They're these individual pieces that collectively can create a picture together. What picture does that make when you put something like a necktie together? I think the body of work has been trying to explore that question. It's a pixel with a really interesting geometry. It's long, it's skinny on one end, it's tapered on another. There's some variation in their width depending on what era they were made in and when they came from. But they have this really predictable format, which became really interesting to explore when we started to build with them. And what building with them looked like for Liz and I was using these repeated actions. And that could be sewing, as we did in this case. It could be wrapping into these kind of large spiral circular forms that would be on the wall. They could be hanging in these kind of donut shapes that sort of descend into this pit in the middle. And what I find is, as with I think any kind of geometrical form that comes out of repeated actions and conglomerations, is the surprise, I think, of the shapes that emerge from those actions. It's something about this that that has continually felt, I think, really alive and really compelling to me. With this form, the other thing I'll say about the shape of the necktie itself, they are like, I like to think of them as like little kimonos. You know, it's the really delicately folded things with multiple layers. It looks like a really kind of simple stripe hanging around the neck and ending at the crotch. And I think that itself is fascinating. I think it's, I didn't have a particular passion for neckties, for wearing them, for thinking about them. People's response to the work and my work with it has definitely deepened my appreciation and connection for them. I really enjoyed hearing some of the artists speak, particularly hearing Katie talk about this ephemera and detritus that comes from culture. And you're looking at thousands and thousands of neckties is a sobering thing about how much gets discarded. And in my fantasy world, I sort of imagine, you know, these men running in the field and throwing them off, and you can imagine me with a basket, you know, collecting them. It did not happen that way. The other question I get is, where did I get all of them? It did not happen that way, unfortunately. Maybe one day. Where they came from, they were donated, believe it or not. The vast majority of them were donated, which still to this day, I'm sorry? Men. No. No, actually, they came from a lot of different places around the country. People heard about this somehow, so I would come home and find a little bag of them waiting for me. But you know, they came from people who had lost a loved one. They came from people who left a career. They came from, you know, death was a common theme. I think moving from one part of life to another. So they kind of came to me in really interesting moments of transition, common moments of transition for people's lives. So that in itself is fascinating to me. I think the symbol of the necktie, I mean, it's a loaded symbol. People come to that with a lot of stories themselves that I hear about. Restriction, I think, is one, whether that's of personality, constriction of breathing around the neck, this idea of a garment that's a noose, conservative, corporate culture, patriarchy. These are some of the things I hear about. The world of finance, power ties, silly ties. There's something about the work that brings up sometimes like a strong negative reaction to the material itself, a whimsical reaction, and puns. I hear a lot of puns with these. What can I say? I think this work. I'm a painter. I'm a painter and drawer, and it's interesting to compare this work with what I'm doing on a flat surface. I think something that's very true throughout my work is this notion of having these kind of large suggestive forms that ask something of you when you look at them to help complete the story. And here I titled this piece, it's interesting, we've been all kind of casually calling it a tree. I don't know if it is that. I don't know that it's not that. I called it Axis Mundi, which is a world pillar, a world axis, right? Something that connects from the ground to heaven and suggests that there's a bridge between two spheres, right? And how does that tie into these neckties? I think when I think of the necktie, this is an individualistic symbol that's seen on individual people and never seen together. Even when a group of men, a group of necktie wearers, I'll expand who can wear neckties. When a group of people wearing neckties are together, they are very much meant to suggest a type of individuation. And I think it is always really fascinating in sculptures, in work, in our lives, to see what happens when we bring things together that are not normally seen together, and to see what happens when those things accumulate and grow. With this, I've been dreaming about this form for a really long time, and it was a real privilege to get to make it here. Particularly in that it is this, for me, this kind of the word I think I'll use is like a kind of flaming emanation. There's something that has a kind of wholly bigger, numinous kind of dreamlike presence that asks you to circumambulate and, if it could move, to follow it, I think. And I think the element of theater and drama and organic movement in it, to me, brings together a lot of references and things that are quite interesting to me and are quite dear to my heart, just at an aesthetic level. Whether you're thinking of, I think, the ruffles on a flamenco dress, or the hyperbolic curls that you'll see in a kelp forest, or even the movement of flame and water or wind. I think these kind of elemental things are really interesting to experience in this piece. And I think those wave-like gestures that happen in here suggest, I think, what happens when individuals, individual objects or people come together to create something larger. I think there's a really interesting sense of the collective unconscious here. I think when I'm really humbled, even being really familiar with large amounts of material, how each one of these really is representative of an individual person and neck that this was wrapped around. And to uncoil it, I think, from one's neck and help bind them together, I think is, I found to be kind of a healing gesture for a culture, and I think, and a world and a mentality that it can be painfully separated. And I think that at the heart of these pieces, that sense of unification and curiosity about what happens when things are united together into something greater than the individual parts. I think that is something that can, I think, guide us personally, and when we think of environmental themes, when we think of the stewardship, our collective stewardship that needs to happen with the world around us, I think the answer is in there, and I find hope in collectivity and in the greater consciousness that can come from individuals coming together. Any questions?
I have a gender non-binary kid, and when I try to explain to older generations who aren't quite clear on the difference between sex and gender and so on, one of the things I describe is how strange a necktie is. How it is such a symbol of masculinity. In fact, it's very difficult for a woman to dress as a man without using either like a hat or a necktie, because so much of what men wear is sort of androgynous.
And if you really isolate the notion of the necktie, it is such a strange thing that why is that required for going to the office to have this particular kind of embellishment that doesn't have a function. And the fact that it is one of the few things that is so specifically gendered, and then becomes not only something so graceful and beautiful and joyous and exploding, but also that you've given it this kind of spiritual aspect, in making it this striving thing towards, it's just really stunning. And the fact that it is, that you're trying to imbue something that is such a cultural marker and so just tied to finance and all those things you said, and turn it into something that's just kind of chaotic and dancing and wild. It just it brings me incredible joy, and I thank you and congratulate you, and I also think you've done such a beautiful job of describing what you're trying to do.
Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll actually say one thing if we have a couple more seconds. Response. 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Yeah, I'll say it's really interesting to think about the evolution of the necktie. It's an abstracted scarf
Yeah.
that has over the centuries become this abstract line. I think men's fashion, I'll say really quickly, is women's fashion we know is geared towards ornamentation, emphasis on the body, and the restriction of movement largely. Men's fashion, in the Western culture, I'll say, we think of a suit, that is an abstraction of armor, and when you look at it, you can see it immediately. If you think of medieval armor, how the lines are both meant to emphasize the torso, still allow movement, and yeah, it's armor in fabric. And I think to be able to free, I think, some of the exuberance from out of the fabric, and take it away from that constraint is sort of an interesting, that has interested me in this work. So thank you so much for that comment.